Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you had a good day today at the Agri-Nutrients Conference hosted by GPCA. We are now into the final session. We have had two excellent presentations from Rajiv Ram of CRU and Meena Chauhan as well, joining us for the final session. Of course, there was a lot of insights in this session shared by both of you. So thank you very much, Rajiv and Meena. Let's dive in quickly into the questions, some that we have put together for you. Rajiv, let me start with you. You were the first speaker in the session. Given the presentation that you made, when do you expect greater downside for crop prices to occur? What is your outlook on that?
Yeah, thanks Udit for the question. So it's a good question. As I was talking about in my presentation, stocks to use ratios have fallen for the past 2 years, and they are forecast to fall again. So we are in that really level of support for prices. Now, these things often work in cycles. So there is often it does take a few crop cycles for a supply response. So if we do look at the current level of crop prices and what impact that's having, so Brazil is coming up to its key soybean planting period. All indications are there's going to be a strong increase in area, around 4%. When you look at kind of their corn planting intentions as well, they're already increasing their full season corn area, and then in Q1 likely to increase safrinha corn by around 4 to 5% as well. And then even the plantings in the US are looking strong at the current level. So there will probably be these few crop cycles to take for a response. So I think there will be greater downside coming for prices more towards to the beginning of 2023. But at current levels of ratios, I think they're very supportive. I mean, the downside to that will be if there's going to be any like major weather events which could keep crop prices up.
Okay, thank you. Another thing that I found really interesting in your presentation was the impact of the sanctions that have been targeting the Belarusian potash sector on potash market.
Yeah.
How long do you expect these sanctions to last? Can we expect them to be opening up soon? And if they continue for another maybe few months, how much pressure will they keep applying on the potash market?
Yeah, it's again a very good question, and a lot of things, a lot of the market is really kind of interested in it. At the moment, our view is that we don't think the sanctions are going to go away anytime soon. Firstly, if we do look at the sanctions from the EU are targeting product, so actual volume, whereas the sanctions from the US are targeting financial transactions. At the moment, the sanctions enacted so far had been limited in scope. So a majority of Belarusian potash is still being exported under kind of loopholes in the wording. So and the EU is important to them because they export via Lithuania, which is an EU country. Now, what the uncertainty being created is how, if these sanctions become tighter, so if those loopholes are closed, essentially. Belarus supplies 20% of global potash, so that's why so much of this uncertainty is concerned. So the risk really more is if those sanctions are going to be tighter and those loopholes are closed, and that could have more of a major supply impact.
Okay, excellent. Rajiv, let's come to the next question, which I will ask to both yourself and I'll bring in Meena into her questions also with this one. What do you see as the medium-term outlook for demand for the fertilizer industry? Also geographically, how important will the continent in our neighborhood, Africa, be in any of these growth prospects? We do know both of you have shown the impact of India and China, but we are very much interested in what's happening in our neighborhood. So if you could just, let's start with Rajiv yourself. give us an understanding of how this could play out in the next, in the medium term? And then Mina, if you could come in after that, please.
Sure. Thanks, Adi. Again, a very good question. Well, in terms of our medium-term outlook, we do expect good growth across the globe. Around, if we look at overall nutrient demand, around 1.6 to 1.7%, we do expect greater upside for phosphates and potash. Nitrogen is still expected to grow, but at a lower rate, because as you saw in my presentation, I did mention some of that greater scrutiny that is being applied to nitrogen via regulations and emphasis to reduce those emissions. Now, in terms of like the global growth prospects, the developed regions, again, slower growth rates, but there's going to be more of an emphasis on emerging economies and I would say mid-tier markets. So talking first about the mid-tier markets, these are markets which have really exhibited strong growth across the nutrients, basically from the perspective of, because they are grains exporters and they've really made strides in developing a better position in those grain export markets. So if we look at countries like Argentina, Russia, Ukraine, Australia, demand in recent years has been strong, and we expect them to continue to be strong as they focus on those markets. Now, coming to your question, a specific question on Africa, again, very good question there, because as growth in as I mentioned, the developed countries is slowing down, there has been a big focus on Sub-Saharan Africa to really develop those markets and distribution systems. So many countries and many producers are target that market. There is a bit of a differential aspect there, because if we look at some of the East Africa side, more of a emphasis on traits like urea and DAP. But if we do look at West Africa, it's more of an NPK focus, compound NPKs and bends. But the growth fundamentals are definitely there in Africa. I mean, the yields are very low, but there is a movement now and understanding growing there towards more accepting of fertilizers, as well as what impact that could have, so that impact on yields, but there's also plenty of arable land potential as well. So there's definitely going to be upside there. And out of all the regions, we probably do forecast the strongest growth rates in Africa.
Thank you, Rajiv. Mina, let's bring you in as well, and same question to yourself, please.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, interesting question. Obviously, from my point of view, I come in terms of looking at fertilizer-based demand for sulfur. I'm thinking about it from a point of view of how much phosphoric acid will be produced and how much sulfur will be used in that end use. So as I kind of touched on in the presentation, Africa really is the kind of a central focal point for growth in sulfur demand, and that is really being driven by that downstream phosphate sector and phosphoric acid production. Morocco is really at the height of that, but certainly also Egypt and to an extent Tunisia. In terms of where that product will be consumed, it would be largely for the export market, of course. So from a sulfur point of view, we're looking at it as, this is the region, Africa, and to an extent as well, the Middle East region with Saudi Arabia in particular, seeing that kind of shift over to an increase in fertilizer-based demand for sulfur.
Okay, thank you. Mina, a couple of questions coming your way, and just before that, for the audience, if you do have any questions for both Rajiv and Mina, please do use the Q&A tab, and we will receive your questions in front of us, which we can ask both of them. Thank you. Sorry, Mina, coming back to you. You discussed the demand changes that are likely with the increased electric vehicle usage that we are forecasting. How much impact can we expect on the supply side for sulfur? And also, will this squeeze the supply for the fertilizer sector?
Sure. I mean, that's, I would say, another big talking point for the industry in recent months and years, and not just the electric vehicle sector, but I think the move towards biofuels and renewable energy and those types of industries. Obviously, sulfur is ultimately a byproduct of the oil and gas sector, and that's why there's that big focus on these questions now. I mean, we're already seeing an impact in some markets like Europe, for example, Western Europe in particular, which is a molten sulfur market. And we've seen a lot of refineries being converted into terminals or biofuels production, and that has led to a reduction in sulfur supply. Longer term, I think this is likely to become more of an issue in other markets globally. But I think what's interesting as well is in the medium term is that we're actually still seeing substantial capacity increase and additions from both the oil and gas industry, which, you know, in that sort of 5 to 7 year time frame would certainly be offsetting any of those losses that we see as a result of sort of the green energy transition overall. I mean, in terms of what this means for the fertilizer industry and I guess ultimately phosphate producers, I would say, you know, I think it's more a case of an increase in focus and where that supply is coming from. So the Middle East, as I discussed, all the projects and new capacity, that's going to be on the increase, and we'll be seeing a lot more, several million tons of additional capacity coming from there. And whereas we'll be seeing, you know, markets which have older, smaller plants in terms of the refining sector, seeing some pressure. So Australia, places like South Africa, some of the smaller markets seeing some downward pressure. And I think ultimately this signals a shift in trade flows for sulfur.
Okay. The next question I have is regarding your presentation where you focused on Western Canada region. How much block sulfur do you suppose is currently stored there? And also, do you expect this to see a route to market if it were to be exploited?
Sure. Another interesting question and one that has come up, I think, a lot recently, especially through second half 2020 and going into 2021, where we've been in a quite constrained and tight market balance for sulfur, and that has led to sort of prices coming up to 2-year highs earlier in the year. So in terms of how much inventories in Alberta today, so it's approximately 10 million tons. In the short-term answer is we're unlikely to see any movement of that block sulfur to the market. And the reason for this is logistics and location of these blocks and the costs that are associated with bringing that to market. You know, there's a remelt process, and then the infrastructure is not quite there in terms of moving that product to where it needs to go, whether to the Port of Vancouver or railed down into the US. So short term, I don't see that coming to market. Longer term, I think obviously we'd need to have the infrastructure there. And also on the pricing side, we'd need to see sort of right pricing for sulfur to encourage that type of movement of inventory.
Okay, thank you. Let's take some questions that have come in from the audience now. I believe the first one is for you, Rajiv. Harshal Tripude is asking about the use of corn for biofuel production. What are the likely impact of new biofuel policies adopted by a few Asian countries on the overall fertilizer demand, mainly urea?
Sure. Thanks for the question there, Harshal. Yeah, I mean, if we do look at the overall trends of what's happening from the kind of non-food uses like biofuels, you know, ethanol use, biofuel use is really sparked back up to, you know, pre-pandemic levels after we've come out of lockdown. Now, in terms of the adoption for corn-based biofuel, I think the uptake in Asia has been pretty slow, but it is something that it is growing. I do know that in China, for example, there are some mandates, and they are currently importing more ethanol. But in terms of the impact, I think here it could be twofold really. It could have an impact on domestic corn area, where if these facilities are kind of built in country, there could be an impact on those domestic urea markets. But I think more likely of the impact on fertilizer demand will be on kind of the grains exporters. So you know, big exporters like corn exporters like Brazil, Ukraine, and the US. The impact could be there if countries are going to be importing more corn to for biofuel use.
Thank you, Rashid. There's one question for you, Meena, an anonymous user there, but they're asking, how do you see the prices for sulfur in Asia starting October 2021?
Well, yeah, this is the question at the moment, because it's been interesting in terms of pricing for sulfur this year. As I mentioned earlier, we saw 2-year price highs towards the start of 2021. After that period, we saw some stabilization and softening in the market. And then more recently, we've certainly seen an uptick in prices. And a lot of this is, of course, being driven by the DAP market price direction. So with the sort of recent short-term increases that we've seen in that market, I mean, the expectation for the very short term now is that we would be seeing those increases being translated into sulfur as well. We're at the starting point of fourth quarter negotiations for contracts here, so it's quite a sort of a critical time. But at the moment, the general sort of market consensus is that sulfur prices are likely to be edging up in the coming weeks, and really, it's as a result of the DAP price, as I said, but also demand is extremely strong right now. We're seeing quite a lot of uptake in a lot of markets. We've seen Chinese stocks being drawn down significantly in the last few months, and that, I think, has led to the view that we would see some level of restocking there, and sort of leading to that those Asian prices going back on a delivered basis.
Okay, thank you. I think we about another 2 or 3 minutes left in our discussion. One question that also came up earlier was about the current challenges facing the shipping industry. Do you guys envisage that this will continue too far in the future, or are we seeing some green shoots appearing anywhere? Do we see an end to this crisis where the arbitrage prices are just going off the roof? I was reading today morning, some prices in Asia are close to $1,150 compared to $73 a year ago. So that's a massive jump. How much of this is impacting the fertilizer industry, and in particular the products that you have focused on, both of you? So can you please shed some light on that for us? Rajiv, let's start with you, please.
I don't know too much on it, to be honest. I mean, to give a reasonable response there, but I can get back, speak to my colleagues that have been covering it and get back to you. But there was just a quick, I saw a question in my actual session panel about Chinese corn area. So if I could just quickly respond to that. So someone was asking about, we do see the Chinese corn market being strong this year. I mean, area has increased. We estimate around to 42 million hectares. But overall, even though there will be some sort of supply response, there has not really been any major weather issues. But overall, given where the stocks to use ratios are and the stock drawdown that has taken place in China, the corn market still remains tight. And that is what has created some of that upside for those corn imports.
Meena, please.
Sure, yes. I mean, I can certainly say from a sulfur perspective, the price of freight has had a huge impact this year. And we've seen, all the delivered prices really being supported by this. So I would say it's absolutely had an impact. And for that reason, that's led to a cost to phosphate producers for this key raw material. We've certainly seen, a lot of different factors, but I think in this period where prices started to soften, one of the things that really kept sulfur prices from really dropping particularly further was the freight market, certainly.
Rajiv, Meena, appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your great insights. They were really helpful for myself, and I'm sure the audience have loved it as well. If anybody wants to revisit these presentations, and they are being recorded and you can see them right now as well. With that, I would like to thank both of you and also thank all the speakers from today for a very engaging day of discussions and interactions and insights. It's been my pleasure to be your host for today. Thank you so much, and I hope to see all of you back in here tomorrow morning at the same time, 11 GST or 10 Saudi time. So for the rest of the day, I wish you all the best of luck and good health and stay safe. And my very best wishes with all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Udit.
Pleasure to be here.